Hey, Jagex just spoiled a brand new Tier 8 Relic Flask of Fervor. This has got me so hyped, I feel like I had to do a spoiler review for this. This is a really exciting T8 Relic for the upcoming Demonic Pacts League, so let's get right into it. First, I'm going to give you an overview of this new relic. If you haven't seen the spoiler already, we'll get into it just to set the base information. I also want to bring up and talk about Last Stand and Undying Retribution, two somewhat similar relics we've had in the past, and then I'll kind of compare and contrast these three relics that we've seen kind of evolve over the past three leagues. I have one big pending question that's still up for understanding, so if you have an answer to that question, please leave a comment below. I'll just be waiting for Jagex to post the details about this relic because it's brand new. They probably won't get back to us until Monday because it is the weekend, and I want to talk about cooldown recovery, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit once we get to that slide. And then lastly, I'm going to give you my final thoughts. All right, so Flask of Fervour. As I mentioned, this is a T8 relic. This is going up against Minion. If you haven't seen that relic, definitely check that out. This is going to be a really powerful relic. So in this relic, you're going to get a flask. When this flask is consumed, it'll restore your hit points and prayer to full. That's already a super powerful niche kind of skill. And then you're also going to get special attack energy fully restored to full. Now, does this mean Specialist isn't coming back? Who knows? Also, during the 2.4 seconds while the flask is kind of in effect, you're going to trigger 3 explosions that are dealing 60% of your base prayer level, right? So that means if you're a 99 prayer, unfortunately, I'm guessing Jagex will round down to 59 damage instead of 60 damage. You'll deal 3 of those hits. Now remember, if the monsters have that much HP or life, you'll do that. Otherwise, you'll just max it on the monsters. And that'll happen in a 3-tile radius, all on all sides. And so it's like a 7x7 tile kind of square around you. In addition to that, during that 2.4 seconds, you're going to reduce all damage to 0. And we saw this with Minion as well. This does not deal damage to Yama. What's important to remember is the damage effect will no longer work on Yama, but you still will have 2.4 seconds of protection against Yama. At least that's my understanding. If Jagex gives a clarification later on, I'll leave a comment in this video below for any updates that happen to this relic. And then lastly, this item has a base cooldown of 3 minutes. I think we've seen that in the past. However, this one you can actually change its cooldown. So that slide I was mentioning that we're going to talk about cooldown recovery. For every 10 damage you deal on a single hit, the cooldown is reduced by 0.6 seconds, or effectively 1 game tick, right? And then again, like every other item that you get from a relic, you can get it back from the League's tutor if it's lost, all right? So let's quickly look at 2 previous relics that we've had. Last Stand, this was in the last league and it was in Gridmaster. Pretty much as soon as you get hit for about 9.6 seconds afterwards, you will take 0 damage. Your stats will be boosted to plus 255 and then rapidly reduced back down to plus 15 above their base level during those 9.6 seconds. And so you want fast attack with like high damage weapons, and you're going to just put out massive amounts of damage. Most important thing to note here is get 9.6 seconds of protection where you cannot be, reduced below 0 HP, whereas in the new relic, it's only 2.4 seconds. And then when this effect ends, all the incoming damage is nullified, and then you get healed, for all the damage you dealt. Undying Retribution is a relic we saw in the past in Trailblazers. This is kind of similar to the current one where you do a big AoE of damage, the 7x7 that I mentioned. Again, the way this relic is worded, it's a 3 square distance from you, so it's the radius. The AoE is about exactly the same. Okay, the other difference here is this was a single hit, which it dealt 200% of a player's prayer. So this was more damage in a single hit. The other one now is split into 3 things, but ours is much more on demand, and we get that 2.4 seconds of protection, which Undying Retribution does not. Undying Retribution also had a 3-minute fixed cooldown with no changes, and then there's some other various texts where like it didn't work in certain situations, and it also did cure you from poison and other disease effects and stuff like that. Okay, so let's compare these two. Last Stand and Undying Retribution, they were both reactive. Those were, if you made a mistake, they were going to save you from that mistake, right? You missed, the wrong prayer on Jad or something like that. Boom, you were able to do it. Now, good players who already knew what they were doing, they were using this skill as a kind of intentional trigger to kind of kill Jad faster, where they could just do a massive hit, drop down, get that hit from Undying Retribution or from Last Stand, triggering it to get that 9.6 seconds of crazy boosted stats to output a massive amount of damage as well. Triggering that and then using like special attacks to do tons of damage was really powerful. Again, it just depended on where you were. If you were like a beginner and you wanted to have some protection, you would use it as a defensive mechanism. And if you were, much more skilled, then you would use that as a much more proactive. But again, triggering it intentionally was a bit clunky because you had to reduce it down. You could force yourself with a rock cake or something like that. Also remember, both of these had a fixed cooldown recovery. And Last Stand was really good. What's, one caveat about Last Stand is because it boosted your stats, your offensive stats, it was actually really good for range and mage. Undying Retribution and Flask of Fervour, they do damage to monsters and enemies nearby you. So if your whole game plan was to attack with range and mage from a distance, you're not going to get that added damage benefit, right? So it's really kind of a little bit more of a melee thing in that AoE, and it's really good for like multiple monsters and things around you, right? And Flask of Fervour, as I mentioned, this is a proactive one. You can trigger it whenever you want. Addition to that, you can accelerate its recovery, and the special attack restoration is just really, really powerful. We haven't had that in the last two relics. Okay, this is a really important pending question, and this is if does the damage from the actual flask count towards the cooldown recovery. Now, this is really important to understand because when the flask triggers and you do a bunch of damage around you, up to just under 180 damage, right, you're probably killing everything around you. Okay, unless it's a big boss, right? In that situation, all that damage that you dealt will clear out the screen, and if this doesn't impact your cooldown recovery, then you don't probably have something else to attack around you to then boost that cooldown recovery. So now you're waiting to use a flask. No, I assume that Jagex would want this to work like this because this would make it balanced, right? Imagine you just go into a group of monsters, you drop the flask, you go to the next group of monsters. Just imagine walking around the current castle dungeon and just popping AoEs and just blowing up packs of dust devils or necreals and then hopping to the next world and just cleaning house. That would be absolutely busted. So my guess and an assumption for now is that the damage that you deal from it will not boost your cooldown recovery, and that way you can use it against bosses, and then you can keep attacking bosses that have a lot of HP and then boost your cooldown recovery that way instead, but it won't work for you just to like erase packs and groups of monsters. But again, we're going to wait for that clarification. Once I get this clarification, I'll make sure to put a comment below, so definitely look down below. If you have found it already and you're paying attention to Discord better than I am, then definitely please make that comment below. Whoever gets there first will pin that comment. All right, cooldown recovery. So this is going to take 3 minutes to cool down, right? Every game tick is 0.6 seconds. So take your 3 minutes, multiply it by 60 seconds. So you get 180 seconds, and then divide it by 0.6. So that's 300 ticks in the game, right? Now remember, every tick that goes down, it's going down, but you're also attacking at every tick. Like there's a delay in your attacks. You can't just keep attacking, and it depends on your weapon, right? Now we've seen in the past with combat masteries, we can get 2-tick weapons down to 1 tick, and then we can get 5-tick weapons down to 2 ticks, right? And so I made some assumptions here. Let's say you have a 1-tick weapon, some darts or a blowpipe, right? And let's say your average damage is 10, right? One more assumption I want to call out is I'm going to assume that because the reduction is an additive to your damage, I'm going to assume Jagex calculates it every time the damage is dealt. And so we're going to round down. So that means even if you hit a 19 and then you hit an 11 on the second hit, that's not going to count for 30 damage. I'm going to assume that's going to count for just 20 damage because I assume it's calculating per tick the damage is dealt. The way it's worded, that makes sense to me. Okay, so let's say your fast weapons, your 1-tick weapons are doing an average hit of 10, and then your 2-tick weapons are doing an average hit of 40, right? Those are like your T-bows and your scythes and stuff that do a lot more damage. Scythe is a little bit weird because it has multiple hit splats, and so we're going to need to know how that works because I'm assuming that those hit splats are different hits, and then therefore it's actually a lower damage amount, and so we'll have to keep that in mind. But like your Tunic and Shadow, your Twisted Bows, and other heavy hitting weapons that you get down to 2-tick, let's assume their damage is 40, right? Now, pretty much what happens at a 1-tick weapon, because you're doing 10, that's reducing it by tick, but also 1 tick has passed, right? You've already done 1.6 or 0.6 seconds have passed as well. So effectively, when you compile this down, assuming you're constantly doing damage, right? There's no downtime between your damage, you're effectively going to reduce your cooldown recovery of your flask by half. Right? So every 150 game ticks or 1.5 minutes, you're going to be able to use your flask in that situation, right? If you're using a 2-tick weapon though, and let's say you're doing 40 damage, right? And we don't know how powerful the combat masteries are and how much max hit we're going to be able to do on average, right? And what the weapons and skills are. But I'm just going to take 40 for that fact as like a kind of good average number. Assuming you're hitting 40s every 2 ticks, you're actually going to reduce your cooldown by 1/3. Right? It's going to be 3 times as fast, and this is going to drop down. So effectively 100 ticks or 1 minute, 0.6 second ticks. And so this is really, really powerful because every time you do this, you also get to regenerate your HP, your prayer, and your special attack, right? And so it just depends on what type of situations you are in, what type of monsters you're in fighting, right? If you're doing raids and you're going from bosses to bosses, for example, if you're in Toa, you're gonna be able to use this kind of every roam segment going on, and you don't have to wait anymore because your damage that you deal will help recover this faster. Right? That was one of the most clunkiest things about Last Stand and Undying Retribution, is that if you were a new player, you kind of wanted this to kind of come down onto cooldown before maybe you went into the next boss just for like your safety net, right? The good thing now is all the damage you deal will help reduce that cooldown, and then there's less downtime in between fighting your bosses and monsters. All right, so final thoughts. Overall, I think this is a really good change and a really powerful relic. One thing I want to call out is this is a proactive method instead of a reactive method, and this actually it goes a lot more towards natural main game play style. In RuneScape, we don't have a lot of save mechanisms for like, oh, you're almost dead, let's revive you. There is one like that in Zulrah, for example, right? And I think Jad has one as well. But aside from that, it doesn't really exist in most gameplay, right? The best way to kind of proactively do this, for example, in PvP, you see a lot of people like, you know that your opponent's going to spec you out, you're running low, you're going to triple eat, and that's going to be like your kind of proactive way to prevent from getting killed in PvP, right? And same way you can kind of overheal and overeat against some bosses. At some times where like, oh, you messed up, you prayed wrong, you can try to overeat and tick eat and things like that. Right? And so this flask is kind of forcing the players to be more proactive in their defensive mechanisms. And I think that's a good change overall. You know, if you've seen my previous videos, I really like the save mechanism as a learning kind of and like a safety net, but I don't mind it also being proactive and giving you that safety net on click. As long as you can react quickly and do it, I assume this is going to be like tick safe, and so you can kind of almost ticket this on the same damage hit. Not 100% sure. We'll find out those details later. Also, for the players who are skilled and want to use this offensively, it's no longer clunky like Last Stand was, right? So this is really, really powerful. You can just kind of get into a boss and just trigger it and go to town and kind of clean house. The AoE damage and special attack are both insane because we saw it with Undying Retribution. There was so much damage coming out of this. In addition to that, the special attack power, like do not sleep on this. If you're kind of, thinking, oh, I could do just one special attack for my weapon or maybe two, now that we're getting twice as many special attacks, and that damage you output from your special attack could recharge your flask, right? Now just imagine like your ruby bolts and your Zerai crossbow, you get 100 damage, right? That's 5 ticks. That's 10 ticks saved, right, from that mechanism. And so doing that twice is absolutely going to be super, super powerful. Okay. And my biggest caveat, I think the one thing to keep in mind is the damage, like I said, is an AoE. It's for nearby targets. And so if you're not doing a lot of, kind of AoE gameplay, if your regions don't have a lot of monsters, for example, if you're not going Kurend and you have all like the Slayer monsters in the dungeon, you're not going to get maybe all the benefits of this. And there is Minion, which is a really powerful constant DPS that will work from every other situations. Now, neither of these work against Yama for a damage perspective, but this flask does give you the 2.4 second save, I believe, unless Jagex clarifies that Yama will be able to kill you through that damage. Okay, so this is where this relic is a little bit better than minion. And so overall, I think this is a pretty good safe play. If you want a defensive mechanism, I think this is going to be your T8 defensive relic. Minion is just going to be all around your overall DPS. And if you're planning to use range and mage, Minion might be the play just because you can attack from afar. Minion also has that AoE damage mechanism. We're just going to have to kind of feel it out on what works best for you. However, I think this is going to be a really, really fun relic. I'm really excited about this. And thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, if you could just leave me a like, that would be great. If you have any feedback or ideas, or you have those clarifications that we're waiting desperately on Discord for, please comment them below. And if you want to see more updates like this, subscribe and leave comments as well on like what other types of analysis videos you might find helpful. Thanks for watching.